Madam Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to respond to the debate and to bring the debate to a close. Madam Speaker, first allow me to thank the Minister for Communications and Works, who was acting premier in my absence, to give the second reading of this bill on my behalf. And I also want to thank the members for their contributions. As was reported, and I'm sure that the acting premier at the time would have informed the House and informed the public that I had attended a very important conference called the Small Island Developing States Conference, which is a subsidiary of the United Nations. And these conferences are held once every 10 years and extremely important in defending and securing the interest of small island developing states, of which we are one. And in fact, as an overseas territory, we have a unique case that needs to be defended. So due to that, Madam Speaker, I was away. But I know that in my absence, the members probably said lots of nice things about me. Just because I know the character of the individuals. So they would have, I'm sure, been very kind in their contributions and approach. I expect no less of them. And, Madam Speaker, I did not get to, unfortunately, listen to the contributions. But of course, I have no doubt. But of course, I've asked my permanent secretary and the members present to give me a good summation of the issues which were brought up, and coming back and being able to listen to the member for the 6th and the member for the 3rd, as well as the members on this side of the aisle, has been helpful to get some sense of some of the issues which have been brought up and which are causing some level of concern, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, first and foremost, let me say, and Honourable Dawson made this point, this is a very important bill, and it is not simply important because it is a COI recommendation. It is important, Madam Speaker, because one of the greatest assets of any nation, and we are building a sustainable nation, Madam Speaker. One of the greatest assets, one of the greatest elements in the building of any nation is land. Malcolm X stated that land is the basis for independence. As we know, we have to live somewhere. And if we have a business, a brick and mortar business that is, that brick and mortar business has to sit somewhere. And In places like the United Kingdom, Madam Speaker, where historically huge tracts of land were owned by the aristocracy or the nobility, persons had to pay taxes just to live on the land. This would have been the peasantry. And that would have been the basis for great wealth and great power for the aristocracy and the nobility. And those, let's call them class lines, still exist today based on who are the quote-unquote landlords, the lords of the land, which is where that term came from when we have apartments for rent. The lords of the land, the ones who own the land and who persons had to pay their taxes to. And persons would be familiar with Robin Hood, with those type of concepts of the peasantry and the land who have to pay taxes to the landowners. But in the Virgin Islands, we had a different situation, of course. We know how we got to these lands as enslaved persons. And we paid for this land through our blood, sweat, and tears by being illegally and inhumanely made to work for no pay for centuries and being brutalized in the process. Land is very dear to us as Virgin Islanders, as has been mentioned. And coming out of slavery, and sometimes and in some instances even before the end of slavery, we became land owners, where we were able to walk and buy land that the planter class in some instances abandoned, and some instances just due to whether hurricanes, protests, whatever the circumstances, were not able to hold on to their lands and pay taxes to their lands. The lands became encumbered, and our ancestors were able to buy huge tracts of land. And as a result, we face a much different situation than many places in the world that have come out of that slavery situation and that colonial situation, where for the most part those persons who descend from the planter class still own the land and still are very powerful. But we can be very proud because we who are the descendants of the enslaved own the land. And that is something that we want to preserve as Virgin Islanders. And let me say without a shadow of a doubt, Madam Speaker, it is my goal, it is my intent to ensure that we as Virgin Islanders and those who have joined our family are the ones who maintain these lands for the benefit of our future generations, and that they may continue to be persons who own their own homes and are able to build their own businesses in their own home, in the land where their ancestors walked and died. And it is sacred to me, Madam Speaker. I take it very seriously. And Madam Speaker, while we're speaking about what's sacred and important to me, let me just go ahead and mention that I am a descendant of the free people of Nottingham Estate. The 25 or so persons who were manumitted on Nottingham, that estate there, by Samuel and Mary Nottingham. My great, however many greats, I believe my specific ancestor was named Hagar. I descend from those people. I mean, I didn't get any Nottingham land. That's all right. And I'm told now that sometimes the bank sells it and persons who are not from Nottingham Estate are able to buy it. I think that's something we have to make sure we prevent. But I'm one of those people. And Madam Speaker, I can assure persons in the public that I would not pass a bill that disenfranchises persons who have claims to ancestral lands. Madam Speaker, I'm also the great-grandson of Charles Wheately, who was born on Anegada. And I'm also a descendant of Anegada. In fact, based on the criteria stipulated for land grants, my father would qualify for a land grant. And I say it very clearly, it is important to me. It is also something which I hold to be sacred. I'm proud of my Anegada heritage. And I certainly will not pass a bill which will disenfranchise the people of Anegada. And let me say it clearly so my cousins in Anegada can hear it. I have heard your cries and I've listened to your concerns. I've also heard the cries of those who are descendants from South Island, other places. And I recognize that the bill in its current form does not provide adequate protection for those individuals. And let me say a little word about that, Madam Speaker. And let me just tell you about the general approach I take to bills. We have the ministry. And the ministry has technical experts, of course. The ministry has a minister who has a responsibility to the public because the minister is democratically elected. And I'm going to address this whole aspect of being democratically elected in a moment, especially in conformity with a lot of what Honourable Fraser had to say. We have to preserve democracy. So as minister, the technocrats in the ministry who deal with these land matters on a daily basis, and they have views, in some instances strong views, on how it should be dealt with, would certainly contribute to a proposal, we will say, on how we might move forward as it pertains to a policy or law. And let me appreciate them, Madam Speaker. I appreciate these persons who have the technical expertise who are there to advise me and to give me their expert perspective, as it should be. Persons who have gone to school, they've trained, they have a great deal of experience, a great deal of knowledge that can be brought to bear on crafting a solution. And this is why democracy is important, Madam Speaker, because the minister, who cannot be a minister without being elected by the people from a particular constituency, has to balance a number of concerns. So while the minister values the advice, the expertise of his technocrats, the minister must also value the opinions, the views, the perspectives of the public. The public who elected him and elected the members of the government, including the members of the opposition. And it is the public who gets services from the government. And the public must also have a say, because in essence we are here to serve the public. And if you have a system where you don't have anybody accountable to the public, in some instances the technocrats or the government officials will have too powerful a voice, and you will have a piece of legislation which is weighted too heavily based on the views of technocrats, which I already acknowledge has its value, but must be balanced with the concerns of the public and in some instances other concerns. So that is why it was important for myself as minister. I went to every meeting where we had a discussion on Crown land policy. And this Crown land management bill, by and large, came out of that policy. Not completely, I agree with the member. For the 6, some things didn't make it over to the bill. I heard you. I heard you. Madam Speaker, let me explain my general approach. The technocrats must put forward their proposal. We try to get it as close as possible, Madam Speaker, but we must recognize, first of all, there are no perfect bills. And a bill that comes out of the ministry will be far from perfect. And I recognize that and I understand it. Now, do we wrangle with the ministry about this or that? Or do we come, let it go through cabinet and let it get into the hands of the House, the people's representatives? Madam Speaker, the bill has so much value added when it gets to the House. Because as I said before, the members of the House have to balance various concerns. So we've had our public consultations, the technocrats have had their say, the Attorney General's chambers have had their say. Now it's time for us to bring it into the House, and you'll get those varied perspectives from the various members who have all of their different experience. And we have members in here with a lot of valuable experience. Don't mind to hit me and poke me a little lick here and there. I ignore all of that. And I try to pick out the aspects of it that can make the bill the best bill possible. Yes, sometimes members, maybe we try to fairmonger a little bit, You know, maybe we try to appeal to people's fears in some instances. Maybe try to scare people. Look what the government trying to do you. But I try to wade through all of that. And we try to pick out some of the elements there that will make the bill the best bill possible. And in my view, Madam Speaker, it works well. We had the Immigration and Passport Amendment Bill. And we went through the same thing. I get a bunch of blows, a crap of blows here and there. But in the midst of it, we had so much great feedback. And we went through the bill. It took us a long time. I hope this one won't take us as long, Madam Speaker. It took us a long time. But the bill was so much better by the time we went through that process. And that is democracy for you. We have members in here who've been here since back in Moses' time. So we have the institutional knowledge in terms of the House. You have new members, you have that fresh perspective that they can bring. And you have people who represent people from different parts of the island. So you have that type of perspective that can help you to, and we're not going to agree on every single issue, but at least we know that all the relevant issues will be properly interrogated. They'll be interrogated, they'll be examined, they'll be scrutinized. And then as reasonable individuals, we will be able to come to a very solid conclusion. And I say that to say, Madam Speaker, that some of what has been brought up, Madam Speaker, I'm sure will be used as a basis for amending in the committee stage. We've been doing so well, Madam Speaker, and I don't want us to get weary in well-doing. And one thing I like about this house, very industrious house. And I try to leave the house fast and in a hurry. Walk right up until 9 p.m. like the standing order said. I like that about this house, a very industrious house. Here to walk, do the work of the people. You don't ever hear them complaining. They're here to do the work of the people. And if they got to stay till 9 o'clock, they don't have a problem. So, Madam Speaker, yeah, they're telling me, Madam Speaker, that I'm being outvoted right now. But I don't even look at it as 3 versus 4. I just look at it as a united 7. A united 7 for the people of the Virgin Islands. The people of the Virgin Islands is the only group that matters right now. So, Madam Speaker, as it pertains to the ancestral lands, let me just say that very clearly. We have to have very specific criteria for those persons who are eligible for those lands. And presently, that's not in the bill. We have to make sure that there is a carve-out in the bill for those persons who have claims to ancestral lands. They just cannot be opened up to whomever may come. And that is important. One of the most contentious parts of the consultations had to do with this whole idea of who was eligible. and I'm sure that this will come up. Some persons felt that land should only be for what we refer to as indigenous Virgin Islanders. And it was very interesting because I even went to Anegada, Madam Speaker. And while the Anegadian people were so forthright about this Anegadian ancestry, not just even Virgin Islands ancestry, Anegadian ancestry, when you ask them enough questions, they wanted to include persons who came there and whose children were born and grew up there and went to school there. So when you start to interrogate and ask questions, it becomes very complicated in terms of who we want to include and who we want to exclude. So, and you look at the Constitution and say belongers give you access to be able to buy land. And you also have to ask yourself as to whether if you started to discriminate between types of belongers, whether that would violate the sections of the Constitution speaking about discrimination. But I know there are many persons who are very passionate about that, but I believe it was the right thing to do to allow all belongers. But we did mention, Madam Speaker, somebody who just became a belonger yesterday should not be looked at the same way as someone who's been in the line for a long time. And those things should be considered when we are making grants. And again, those type of considerations are not found in the bill. Though they exist in the policy did mention that certain factors should be considered when making grants. And your tenure and how well you are anchored in here in the community, that should count first for something. And all of those things, Madam Speaker, we have to ensure that in this bill that we are able to sort out. Madam Speaker, I want to speak to some of what Honourable Fraser spoke about when he spoke about the role of the minister. And let me say I agree with him. And I know that there's strong resistance to the point, Honourable Fraser, even though it is stated so clearly in the Constitution. And therefore, Madam Speaker, we had to struggle a little bit just to get that provision change in the Immigration and Passport Bill, where we had a public officer having the rights which were conferred to the minister in the Constitution. Which should not be the case. But if you go legislation by legislation, policy by policy, you will find an effort to sideline the minister. And sometimes even I find ministers, members of the House of Assembly, go along with this whole effort to sideline themselves. But I think we all must be united, this United Seven we have here. We all must be united to defend democracy, because that's what it comes down to. And I'll just say a little bit about why I think we have this struggle. It's because we're in a colony. Ultimately, a lot of our people have been influenced by the mentality of a colony. And we don't even realize it, unfortunately. it's been ingrained in us so much that we think it's logical to sideline the minister. The minister doesn't have time to be involved in these matters. Or that's not the role of the minister. Or the minister is too influenced by the public. That's exactly what you call democracy. That's exactly what you call democracy. And it's because we have a situation where we have an unelected person who has so much power in the governor. And it just filters down and trickles down to everybody else. And sometimes the minister is even frowned upon because he's getting pressure from the public. That pressure from the public is what you call democracy. His constituents, or the persons who are represented, they have a voice through their representatives. And that public pressure is good. It's supposed to help the system work better for the people. But oftentimes it's resisted, so we say, well, the minister shouldn't really be involved. Or maybe we just want to hand the minister something to read, or you just read that. And we see the minister as a ceremonial figure who doesn't really have a real say in decision making. And this is how our government is functioning. And then when the minister says, well, I've been elected to do certain things, I have to have a say in things. Then it's a little struggle and it's a little back and forth and it's more difficult than it needs to be. And that is because, unfortunately, many of us are suffering from a colonial mentality. And it translates itself into the bills. We don't want to give the minister any authority in the bills, even though the Constitution gives the minister the authority very clearly. And I'm very sure that our Honourable Fraser was there. I believe Honourable Skelton was there as well. I believe this is why we fought for the Constitution that we had, so that the ministers could have the authority. That's why we fought for cabinet. So we must be very careful that we don't strip the ministers and the cabinet of the authority that the Constitution gives. And wherever it is we find it, we need to make sure we correct it. So that's certainly the case in this bill. Let me just address the whole idea of market rates. This idea of market rates has come up in the Commission of Inquiry. And, I can say it without fear of contradiction. And I can say it honestly, that it's come up as an issue that we provide land to Virgin Islanders at a subsidized rate. Somebody wants to say, well, you can't sell this land to your people at this rate. And I've been very strong about the fact that is a policy decision. And when you look at the Constitution tells you that the minister is responsible for lands. He's responsible for the administration of those lands. There's nothing in the Constitution which contradicts you as a minister responsible for lands, or as a cabinet, which is the policy-making entity of the government, from making the decision to offer land at a subsidized rate. We sell water at a subsidized rate. Suppose somebody said to you, man, you can offer education up at HLSCC at a subsidized rate. Now, who are you to say that to us? Who are you to say what we can subsidize and not subsidize for the benefit of our people? That is our decision. And that is nothing more than a policy decision. It's nothing to do with corruption. It's nothing to do with illegality. It just has to do with a decision that you make to empower your people. Now, when you go to the United Kingdom, you have persons who get free housing or very low housing. They get social benefits. They get checks in the mail. That is a decision that they made in the best interest of their people. And we have to have the ability to be able to make decisions in the best interest of our people. Those things are policy matters. It has nothing to do with integrity, nothing to do with transparency, nothing to do with accountability, nothing at all to do with good governance. That's just a decision that you make. So that has found its way into the bill, and we have to take that out of there and leave it as a matter to be determined by the cabinet what type of rates you want to charge, whether a subsidized rate or whether you want to go to the full market rate. So we can't hamstring ourselves by putting that in there. And even in terms of the amount of time that you want to lease somebody, don't put that in the law. That is something for a cabinet to be able to determine at any given time. We also have the matter of agricultural lands. And in 2022, we passed the Food Security and Sustainability Act, which is taking a very long time to come into force. Honourable Dawson, we have to try to see if we could get whoever is holding it up to release it, because it's taking incredibly long. It's 2022, we're now in 2024. It's 2 years since we passed that, and it's still not in force. It's not something that I'm pleased about. But anyway, that is a body which has been tasked with managing agricultural lands. So we have to ensure that in committee stage that there's good congruence between this bill and the Food Security and Sustainability Act. Make sure that both of them are working well together. I believe what the member for the 6th brought up as it pertains to the seabed and reclaiming land, it is worth discussing, because I believe, of course, that we should put some stipulations in place to ensure that if persons make investments such as that they have some level of protection. Yeah, that is something that I'm committed to looking at in committee stage. Madam Speaker, I won't go much further because we have to get some work done, so I won't go much further. So I want to see how we can maximize the rest of the evening and get some good work done. I'm looking at the members, they still look fresh. They look mighty fresh. They look fired up and ready to go. So I myself, I came back on the trip. I had some little sniffles, but when I got here and started engaging with the bill, I just got a burst of energy, Madam Speaker. So I'm ready to go for about another 2 hours straight. So, Madam Speaker, let's see if there's any more very important very more important matters that we had to deal with, Madam Speaker. Members did a good job. Okay, before I close, Madam Speaker, there's some areas here where we injected the governor. And we're going to have to fix those areas, Madam Speaker, because when you read the Constitution, and perhaps I should read the Constitution for the benefit of the public. The Constitution says, Section 41, subject to any law for the time being enforced in the Virgin Islands, the governor or the minister, when duly authorized by the governor by writing under his or her hand, in Her Majesty's name, on Her Majesty's behalf, may under the public seal make grants and dispositions of lands or other immovable property in the Virgin Islands, or interest in such property that are vested in Her Majesty for the purposes of the government of the Virgin Islands. But any such grant or disposition shall require the prior approval of the Cabinet. The minister shall have responsibility for administering all lands and other property referred to in subsection 1. In this section, a minister means a minister charged with the responsibility for Crown lands. I'm glad I read that before I closed, Madam Speaker, because it also brought to me another point I want to discuss in regards to Anegada lands. But let me deal with this matter with the governor first, sir. The Constitution clearly gives authority to the minister. And I received an instrument from the governor saying that I am responsible for lands. And that's what the Constitution provides. It says the governor or the minister when duly authorized by the governor. So I've been duly authorized by the governor. So there's no reason, and this is why I spoke about we have to make sure we don't let those colonial things slip in here. The Constitution is telling you the minister has the responsibility. There's no reason for us to inject the governor there. That's taking us backwards. So let's make sure that we fix that in the committee stage. The point as it pertains to Anegada lands, Madam Speaker, is I need to make the point to my friends, my cousins in Anegada that under the Constitution it's the Cabinet. It is the Cabinet that approves the grants of land. Now, I get the impression that some of my cousins want to be responsible for making decisions on grants. And even suggesting, well, once you make a recommendation, Cabinet must agree to it. Well, that's not how Cabinet works. Cabinet has to be in a position to say yes or no. You can't say Cabinet has to follow your recommendation. You make a recommendation, Cabinet make a decision. Yeah? So to think that you can create a situation where Cabinet just has to do what you say, that's not the case. First of all, Cabinet has to set the criteria. Just like Honourable Fraser said, the minister will bring forward a paper, perhaps maybe setting the criteria that needs to be considered, that can be applied, and then you bring it back to Cabinet, and Cabinet, because Cabinet is the one that set the criteria in the first place, will just approve them based on that criteria. Once it has been applied properly. If there's any room for any discretion, meaning there's a situation that has not been anticipated in the policy, then cabinet has to make a decision that's reasonable. Using all of the best practice and best principles as it pertains to exercising discretion. But you can't say, you think so? You think so? So you can't create a situation where you believe that you're going to send something and cabinet is just going to rubber stamp it. That's not how it works. So it doesn't matter if it's a board, it doesn't matter if it's an advisory panel, it doesn't matter if it's some kind of authority, it doesn't matter what it is. The decision is for cabinet. Point blank. The decision is for cabinet. And what cabinet requires is information. Cabinet requires information. And I'll say that this bill does not give enough, it doesn't give cabinet enough information, because the bill is suggesting that it has to go through a board, and the board could just outright reject it if it wants to. That's a problem in this bill. That has to be fixed in committee. Because what cabinet needs is information. It's our bill. It's our bill. The House of Assembly will pass it. Yeah, absolutely, but I can't pass it by myself. So it's our bill. So I'm saying to you, we have some work to do in committee. And what cabinet requires is information. Cabinet requires the information from whatever grouping from Anegada will make these recommendations based on the criteria that cabinet establishes. So in committee stage, we're going to fix that part and make sure that we have a proper process and mechanism in place to make the recommendations. And while we're on the topic, Madam Speaker, we know for many moons, Anegada people have been promised their lands. And I just have to say to you, we are very close right now. We ran into some challenges here and there. The Attorney General's chambers pointed out certain things to us that needed to be done before we could make these grants, because we want to make sure we're not arbitrary in terms of how we give grants. It's according to very clear policy, that we have all of the documentation that is required. So it's been some delays, but one thing I've committed to, I have committed to ensuring, Madam Speaker, that I'm not going to kick this can for somebody else to deal with. During this administration, we're going to see quite a number of grants to Anegada. They're going to receive their deeds for the lands over there. And as opposed to looking for an authority to distribute lands, what we really need in Anegada, Madam Speaker, is we need that same development corporation which is spoken about. We need a body that's going to manage the development of Anegada. Because once they get those deeds over there, development is going to explode. And we don't want it to explode in a uncoordinated, unplanned, ad hoc fashion. So we're going to need an entity that's going to help to manage development in Anegada. That's really what's needed in Anegada. So with those few words, Madam Speaker, I will take my seat. Madam Speaker, I see that the member for the 9th District has arrived. So, Madam Speaker, I'm not.
What's the question, Premier?
So I'm just saying I'm about to finish my wrap up, but I'm not sure if you're going to give the member opportunity to.
No, Premier.
Yeah.
Based on the standing orders, once you've given your reply, no other member can speak. So,
All right, Madam Speaker. I know anything could be done but that the members decide on, but
that is specific. It's very strict.
all right. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you.